She looked me dead in the eye in front of my entire family and called me a glorified babysitter. Not under her breath, not in passing. Loud enough for my mother, my brother, my sister-in-law, and every person seated at that Thanksgiving table to hear every single syllable. And when I turned to my wife, Rhonda, expecting her to say something, expecting her to correct her daughter, expecting her to do the one thing a partner is supposed to do in that moment, she set down her fork, looked at me, and said the words that ended everything. "She's not your daughter, Douglas. Don't correct her." I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this story. I'm not a man who loses his temper. 31 years of military service followed by a decade running a private security consulting firm in Roanoke, Virginia, will teach you to control your reactions. Will teach you that the most dangerous thing you can do in a volatile situation is act before you think. So I smiled. I picked up my glass of water, I took a sip, and I smiled at Kiara across that table like she'd just said the most interesting thing in the world. And while everyone else sat in stunned silence trying to figure out what that smile meant, I already knew exactly what was going to happen next. My name is Douglas Mercer. I'm 53 years old. I spent 31 years serving this country, deployed to places most people can't find on a map, came home in one piece and built something real with my own hands. I run a private security consulting firm that works with corporate clients across the Mid-Atlantic region. I own a home in Roanoke, Virginia, 3 blocks from where I grew up. I'm not a complicated man. I believe in hard work, I believe in loyalty, and I believe that when you make a commitment to someone, you honor it. Or at least I used to believe that people shared those values. I met Rhonda at a charity function for veterans families in Richmond about 2.5 years ago. She was 47, worked as a hospital administrator, and had a presence that I noticed immediately. Confident, articulate, the kind of woman who knows what she wants and isn't afraid to say so. She had a daughter, Kiara, 20 at the time, a junior at a university in Northern Virginia studying business. Rhonda had raised her alone after her first marriage ended when Kiara was 8. I respected that. When Rhonda and I started dating seriously, I went in with my eyes open. She came with a daughter. That was part of the package. I didn't have children of my own. My first marriage ended before we had kids, and somewhere between deployments and building my business, fatherhood had simply never happened for me. What I didn't understand yet was that Rhonda's relationship with Kiara had no room in it for anyone else. Kiara comes first wasn't just a priority. It was the governing principle of everything Rhonda did and didn't do. And I was about to learn what happens to anyone who forgets that rule. We got married 11 months ago in a small ceremony in Charlottesville. Blue Ridge Mountains in the background, mid-October, the leaves had just turned. My brother Wesley and his wife came from Pennsylvania. My mother flew in from Florida. And Kiara stood through the entire ceremony with her arms crossed and an expression on her face like she was being made to sit through a meeting she hadn't been invited to. I noticed. I told myself it was nerves, it was change. It was a young woman watching her mother marry someone new. I gave her the benefit of the doubt. That was my first mistake. The arrangement was that Kiara would continue living in the apartment near campus that Rhonda had been paying for. Full tuition, covered. Monthly living expenses, covered. A car that Rhonda was making payments on. I didn't complain. Kiara was Rhonda's daughter and Rhonda's responsibility. I wasn't going to swoop in and try to play father to a grown woman who hadn't asked for that. What I did do was try to build something, a relationship. Not because I needed Kiara to love me like a father, but because I was married to her mother, and it seemed like the decent thing to do. The first few months, Kiara was simply cold. Polite enough on the surface, but cold. She'd come over for dinner, answer questions with the minimum words necessary to qualify as participating, and leave as soon as she could. Rhonda never pushed her, never said to her daughter the things a thoughtful parent might say like, "He's a good man, give him a chance, do it for me." But I kept showing up. When Kiara's car had a tire blowout on I-81 in the middle of a February ice storm, I drove out at 11 at night to wait with her until the tow truck came. When she mentioned her laptop was failing during finals week, I drove to Best Buy on Electric Road the next morning and replaced it, left it at the apartment, no fanfare. When she needed a professional recommendation for a summer internship and was struggling because she didn't have working connections, I wrote her one on my firm's letterhead that I genuinely believe helped her land the position. Not once did she thank me in a way that suggested she understood any of it cost me anything. And Rhonda would say, "That was so kind, Douglas," but never once pushed her daughter to acknowledge it. I let it go. You adjust. You decide what battles are worth fighting. And then came Thanksgiving. If you're watching this and you've ever had to navigate a blended family, if you know what it's like to try to love people who haven't decided whether they'll accept it, then before we go any further, I want you to hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below. Tell me what you would have done in my position, because the story is just getting started. And what happened next is something I'm still processing even now. Like this video, if you've ever smiled, when what you really wanted to do was the opposite. Thanksgiving at my house in Roanoke. My mother, Beverly, 76 years old, had flown up from Sarasota specifically to spend the holiday with us. My brother Wesley and his wife Patricia drove down from Pittsburgh. I wanted it to go well. I spent 2 days preparing. Smoked a turkey using a method I'd learned from a staff sergeant in North Carolina that takes patience and produces the best bird you'll ever eat. Made my mother's cornbread dressing from a recipe she wrote out for me on a note card in 1998. Rhonda contributed sweet potato pie and a green bean casserole. Wesley brought enough wine to take down a small regiment. Kiara arrived at 3 in the afternoon, 90 minutes before dinner, looking like she'd come under protest. She was dressed fine, nothing inappropriate, but the energy she carried in through my front door was the same energy she always carried, low and flat and making it clear she was doing this as a favor. My mother greeted her warmly. Beverly Mercer is 76 years old with a southern accent and a personality like a warm blanket, the kind of woman who makes everyone feel seen immediately. She hugged Kiara and asked her about school, about her internship, about what she was studying. Kiara gave her answers that were polite enough, but they were the same short, contained answers she always gave. The minimum viable kindness. We sat down to dinner at around 4:30. Everything on the table, candles lit, the kind of scene that looks like a photograph of what family is supposed to be. My mother said grace. Wesley poured wine. Patricia was telling a story about their drive down through the Shenandoah Valley and how spectacular the late fall colors had been. I asked Kiara how her finals preparation was going. I asked specifically because I knew she had 2 difficult exams coming up in the first week of December, and because I had been the one, 3 months earlier, who had quietly connected her with a former colleague of mine who now taught economics at a university in D.C., and who had agreed to do a few tutoring sessions with her over video call. I'd set that up without making a big deal of it. Kiara looked at me across the table with an expression I didn't recognize at first because I'd never seen it turned fully in my direction before. It was contempt, clear and unhidden. "It's fine," she said. "Not that you'd understand any of it. You're a security consultant, not an academic." There was a beat of silence. My mother's hand paused over the cornbread dressing. Wesley glanced at Patricia. I kept my voice completely level. "You're right that my background is different from yours. I was just asking how it's going." Kiara leaned back in her chair like she was settling in for something. "You ask a lot of questions for someone who isn't actually part of this family. You're basically just Mom's husband, like a glorified babysitter who happened to sign some paperwork." The table went absolutely silent. My brother Wesley put his fork down. My mother looked at Kiara like she'd never seen anything quite like this before in 76 years of living. Patricia stared at her plate, and I looked at Rhonda. Rhonda was looking at her daughter with an expression I couldn't fully read. There was a flicker of something there, some awareness that this had crossed a line. And then, before I could say anything else, before Wesley or my mother could find words, Rhonda turned to me. "She's not your daughter, Douglas," Rhonda said quietly. "Don't correct her." And just like that, the flicker was gone. She picked up her fork and went back to her food. I sat with that for approximately 3 seconds. On the surface, you saw a 53-year-old man pick up his glass, take a sip, and smile. What was happening underneath was something else. 31 years of military discipline means you learn to separate the emotion from the decision. You feel both. You just don't let them collide in public. The decision was already forming with the clarity of a mission brief. I smiled at Kiara. I smiled at Rhonda. I looked at my mother, whose eyes carried the grief that comes from watching someone you love be humiliated by someone who should have protected them. And I said, in the most normal voice I could produce, "Beverly, tell Wesley about that trip you took to Savannah last spring, the one with the ghost tour." And we moved on. My mother, God bless her, followed my lead. She started talking about Savannah. Wesley followed. Patricia followed. We finished dinner. We had dessert. Kiara ate quickly and excused herself shortly after, saying she had to get back to campus. Rhonda walked her to the door. I cleared the table. After Kiara left, no one mentioned what had happened. Wesley looked at me once when Rhonda was in the kitchen, a long look that carried 35 years of brotherly understanding. And I gave him the smallest nod that meant, I know, I'm fine. Leave it. My mother hugged me goodnight and held on a few seconds longer than usual. Rhonda and I went to bed without discussing it. She fell asleep. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling of a house I owned, in a city where I'd grown up, and thought about everything that had just happened, and everything that needed to happen next. The smile was not forgiveness. The smile was strategy. By morning, I had a clear picture of the next 24 hours. The first call I made was at 7:15, while Rhonda was still asleep. I called my personal attorney, Garrett, a man I've worked with on business contracts for 8 years. I explained the situation and asked him to clarify questions about our financial arrangements. We had a prenuptial agreement. I had insisted on it, not out of suspicion, but because clear agreements prevent disasters. The prenup was specific. Everything I had brought into the marriage was protected. Any financial support I voluntarily extended toward Kiara was mine to give and mine to withdraw. Garrett confirmed what I already knew in under 20 minutes. The second call I made was to the university's billing department. Kiara's tuition arrangement was complicated. Rhonda paid the bulk of it, but 4 months into our marriage, I had voluntarily added myself to the account and begun contributing a significant portion of the semester payments because Rhonda had been navigating some unexpected expenses in her own budget, and I had wanted to help. There was no legal obligation. There was no signed agreement. It was a husband helping his wife carry a financial load, done out of goodwill. I removed my contribution authorization from the account. Quietly, cleanly, effective immediately. The third thing I did was call the dealership handling the financing on Kiara's car. Several months into the marriage, when Kiara's car needed significant repair, and Rhonda was weighing whether to repair or replace it, I had co-signed a new lease to help Rhonda qualify for better terms. My name was on that contract. I called and asked about my options as co-signer. They explained them clearly. I didn't do anything irreversible that morning. I gathered information. I made inquiries. I positioned myself. I am not a man who acts from emotion. I am a man who acts from preparation. By 8:30, Rhonda was awake, making coffee in the kitchen. I came downstairs, and she turned around and smiled at me like it was a completely normal morning after a completely normal Thanksgiving. I poured myself coffee and sat down at the kitchen island. I want to talk about what happened at dinner yesterday, I said. The smile thinned slightly. Douglas, Kiara is just adjusting. She's at a difficult age and the transition has been hard for her. She didn't mean anything serious by it. I looked at her. She called me a glorified babysitter in front of my mother, my brother, and his wife. She's 21 and she's still figuring out this family dynamic. You know how young adults are. I know how young adults are, Rhonda. I also know how the mother of a young adult is supposed to respond when that young adult publicly disrespects her husband at his own dinner table. The smile was gone now. I told you at the table, she's not your daughter. You don't discipline her. I didn't try to discipline her. I tried to speak to her respectfully. You shut me down in front of my family. Rhonda set her mug down. I'm not going to let you create conflict with my daughter. I promised her before we got married that nothing would change between us. She's my priority. She's always going to be my priority. I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about the tire blowout on I-81 at 11 at night in a February ice storm. I thought about the laptop, the letter of recommendation, the tutor, the co-signed lease, the tuition contributions, all of it given voluntarily, freely, because I believed I was investing in a family. I understand she's your priority, I said. I need to understand where I fall in that order. You're my husband. That's different. Is it? Because from where I sat last night, it looked like Kiara could say anything she wanted to me at my own table, and your response was to tell me to stand down. Rhonda's jaw tightened. You're overreacting. And that was the word that settled everything for me. Overreacting. My mother had flown from Sarasota to have Thanksgiving with her son and his new wife. My brother and sister-in-law had driven 4 hours from Pittsburgh. We had all sat at a table I had set, eating food I had largely prepared, and a 21-year-old had called me a glorified babysitter in front of all of them, and my wife's response to my objection was that I was overreacting. I finished my coffee. I'm going to head into the office for a few hours, I said. I have some things to take care of. The next 48 hours moved quickly. I want to be clear about something because I know how stories like this can be read. I did not do what I did next out of revenge. I did it because I had spent 11 months investing in this family with patience and good faith, and I had received a clear signal that the terms of this relationship were not what I had believed them to be. When a business arrangement is misrepresented, you renegotiate. When the people you've invested in demonstrate that your investment is not valued, you redirect it. I withdrew my financial contributions from Kiara's tuition account. I initiated the process of removing myself from the lease co-signature. I transferred the funds I had been directing toward Kiara's living expenses back into my own accounts, and then I waited. Rhonda called me at 2 in the afternoon of the day after Thanksgiving. I was in my office on Campbell Avenue going through client reports. I answered on the second ring. Her voice was not the calm, controlled voice of a hospital administrator who managed hundreds of people. Her voice was a register higher than usual and shaking slightly at the edges. "I got a notice from the university," she said. "I know. And from the dealership." "I know." "Douglas, what did you do?" "I withdrew my voluntary financial contributions," I said. "The ones I had been making without any formal agreement, out of goodwill." "You can't do that." "I can. I checked with Garrett. I'm legally within my rights on all of it." The silence on the other end of the line had a quality to it I recognized from years of difficult negotiations. It was the silence of someone recalculating. She's going to lose her housing placement if the tuition isn't paid by December 1st, and she needs that car. She drives 40 minutes each way to her internship. "I understand the impact," I said. "I considered it carefully before I made the calls." "So this is punishment? You're punishing my daughter because she said something thoughtless at dinner?" I let that land without responding for a moment. "Rhonda," I said, "I want you to think about what you just said. You said she said something thoughtless. Yesterday you told me I was overreacting. You told me not to correct her because she's not my daughter. I'm asking you to find a consistent position, because those three things can't all be true at the same time." Another silence. "What do you want, Douglas?" Her voice was quieter now. "Precise." "I want you to understand what this marriage actually is," I said. "I want you to understand that I have been contributing financially and emotionally and practically to your daughter's life for nearly a year, not because I was obligated to, but because I was trying to be a good partner to you and a decent presence in her life. And I want you to understand that when she spoke to me the way she did at that table, and when you backed her instead of addressing it, you communicated something to me very clearly." "What did I communicate?" "That my goodwill has no value here, that it can be consumed indefinitely without acknowledgement or reciprocity, that your daughter can treat me however she chooses, and you will tell me to accept it." The silence this time was the longest one. When Rhonda spoke again, her voice had changed. The shaking was gone. What was there instead was something harder. "I will not allow you to use money to control my relationship with my daughter." "I'm not controlling anything," I said. "I'm withdrawing something I was giving freely. I can do that." "You're doing it to hurt her." "I'm doing it because I am reevaluating what I am willing to contribute to a household where I am treated as optional." I heard her exhale. "I need time to figure out the finances." "That's reasonable. And I need you to understand that Kiara is not going to apologize to you." I considered that. Then we each have very clear information about where we stand. I want to stop here for a moment, because I know there are people watching this who think I went too far, who think that withdrawing financial support from a 21-year-old college student, regardless of what she said, was disproportionate. I have sat with that judgment. I have turned it over. And here is what I keep coming back to. For 11 months, I had been quietly, consistently, generously building a life with this woman and extending care toward her daughter. Not because I was forced to, not because anyone asked me to, because that is the kind of man I am. And in one dinner, in one unguarded moment, the truth of how that was received had been laid completely bare. Kiara called me a glorified babysitter. Rhonda told me to stand down. And in the morning, Rhonda called it thoughtless and called my response overreacting. I wasn't punishing Kiara. I was answering a question she had been asking me, in one way or another, for 11 months. She had wanted to know if I was optional. I was answering her. The weeks that followed were difficult in the particular way that a marriage under quiet strain is always difficult. Rhonda and I were still in the same house, still technically operating as a unit, but something had shifted. She was working through the financial reorganization around Kiara's tuition and the car. She solved it. I want to give her credit for that. She renegotiated the lease into her name alone, took full responsibility for the tuition balance, and covered it. It cost her significantly. She managed it. What she did not do was bring Rhonda and I together to have a real conversation about what had happened and what it meant. Until the night she finally came to my home office and closed the door behind her. I looked up from my desk. She sat down across from me in the chair I kept there for client calls. The lamp on the credenza made the light low and warm. We looked at each other for a moment with the honesty that you sometimes only find when people are truly exhausted from performing. "I handled it wrong at the table," Rhonda said. I didn't say anything. I waited. "She was rude. I should have said something. Instead, I made it worse." She paused. "I'm not good at criticizing her. I know that about myself. I've spent 21 years making sure she was okay, and somewhere in there, I lost the ability to push back on her." I said, "I know. I understood that about you before we got married. But it's not an excuse." "No," I said. "It's not." She looked at her hands. "The money, Douglas. When you withdrew everything. Kiara called me crying. She thought she was going to have to drop out." "I know. That was hard for me to witness. I imagine it was." She looked up. "Was that the point? To make her scared?" I thought about how to answer that truthfully. "The point was to make both of you understand that what I contribute here has weight, that when you treat it as automatic and irrelevant, there are consequences to that. I'm not an appliance, Rhonda. I'm not background infrastructure. I'm a person who made a choice to invest in this family." Rhonda was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was careful. "She's willing to talk to you, Kiara. She called me this afternoon. She said she wanted to apologize. That surprised me. I didn't show it, but it did." "Did she say why?" "She said my mother called her." I almost smiled. Beverly Mercer, 76 years old, calling a 21-year-old to have a quiet conversation. I could only imagine how that conversation had gone. My mother has a gift for making people understand things without ever raising her voice. "What did my mother say to her?" Rhonda's mouth curved very slightly. "Something about how she raised her son to show up for people, and that it was a shame not everyone learned to recognize when they were being shown up for." I sat with that for a moment. "I'll talk to her," I said. "Thank you. But Rhonda, I need you to hear something clearly. The issue isn't just that Kiara was rude. The issue is that I have been investing in this family for almost a year, financially, practically. Every time that car broke down on a highway, every recommendation letter, every connection I made for her. And when she insulted me at the table, your response confirmed what I had been quietly suspecting for a while. That my contributions were expected but not valued, that I could pour everything in, and the moment I said anything about it, I was the problem." Rhonda's eyes were bright in a way that meant she was holding something back. "I know," she said finally. "I know I let that dynamic develop, and I don't know how to fix it overnight." "I'm not asking for overnight," I said. "I'm asking for honest." "Okay?" "Okay," I said. Kiara came to the house on a Sunday in early December. She sat at the same kitchen table where Thanksgiving dinner had happened. She looked younger without the contempt on her face. Just a 21-year-old who had done something she knew was wrong and was trying to find the language for it. She didn't have a long speech. She said she'd been taking her frustration about her life and her mother's marriage out on me since before she had any reason to. She said she knew I hadn't deserved what she'd said at Thanksgiving. She said she was sorry. I looked at her for a moment. "I accept that," I said. "And I want to be honest with you about something. I was never trying to replace your father or insert myself as a parent. I was trying to be someone decent who your mother chose to be with. That's all. But decent doesn't mean invisible. And what you said at that table was designed to make me feel invisible." She nodded slowly. "I know. I'm going to need us to establish something different," I said. "Not a forced relationship. Not Sunday dinners where we pretend. Just basic respect. That's the floor." "Yeah," she said. "I can do that." It wasn't a movie moment. There was no dramatic breakthrough, no tearful embrace. She finished her coffee, she and her mother talked in the other room for a while, and she left. But something in the temperature of the house had shifted slightly. I want to tell you where things stand now because this isn't the kind of story that wraps up with a bow. Rhonda and I are still married. We're in couples counseling, something I proposed she agreed to. We have a therapist near downtown Roanoke who has been good at creating space where we can say the hard things. The work is ongoing. Kiara is still in school. Rhonda handles her finances fully now. I stepped back from any financial involvement in Kiara's life, not as punishment anymore, but as clarity. The boundary is clean. If the relationship with Kiara develops into something genuine over time, perhaps that changes, but I'm done investing ahead of the relationship. My mother sent me a card in December with 3 sentences. You handled yourself with more grace than most men could have. Your father would have been proud. I love you. I kept it in my desk drawer. Wesley called a few weeks after Thanksgiving. He said, I've been trying to figure out how to say this, so I'm just going to say it. I have never been prouder of how you handled yourself than I was at that table, and I've seen you under actual fire. The thing nobody tells you about these situations is that the hardest part isn't the confrontation. It's the quiet afterward. Sitting alone with the question of whether any of it can become what you believed it would be. I don't have a clean answer yet. I spent 31 years learning that some things take longer to build than planned, and that quitting before the timeline is complete is its own kind of failure. So I haven't given up. But I am standing on different ground. Ground where I know the weight of what I carry. Ground where no one gets to call that weight optional without consequences. The morning after Thanksgiving, when I made those calls, I wasn't destroying anything. I was answering a question. The question was, do you know what you have here? The answer I got at that dinner table was no, so I made sure they found out.